Well, I think they think we're just all a bunch of elite, yuppie, leftover hippies who are doing nothing but spending all of our incredible amounts of disposable incomes at Whole Foods. And knock yourself out. If you want to do that, you certainly can and eat quite well. But the main reason I wrote the book, as a consumer reporter, which was also part of my title as an investigative reporter, I was following the Consumer Price Index for years. And I knew what the price of foods were, and I knew that beans were very cheap and hadn't gone up pretty much in 30 years. And also whole grains. If you buy whole grains in their natural state, they're going to be ridiculously cheap. So my thought was, if people throw out the meat and dairy and replace that with whole grains and beans, they're going to have plenty of money left over to buy the produce.
The Vidal Speaks podcast.
Episode 83, Ellen Jaffe Jones, eating vegan on $4 a day to reverse disease, look younger, and have better sex. Welcome to Vidal Speaks. My name is Deborah Vidal, former 11-year LPGA golf pro turned classical homeopath, certified plant-based nutritionist, and wellness coach. Each week here on Vidal Speaks, we bring you knowledge, inspiration, or natural remedies to help you take charge of your health and feel your best. I believe health is freedom and knowledge is power. So tuning in each week will give you the power to take steps towards freeing yourself from the chains that hold you back from having the energy to do all you want in life. No matter where you are in your journey of wellness, Vidal Speaks can help. I promise. Hi guys, welcome back. You know by now that I'm Deborah Vidal, sometimes known as Vidal, and the host of my podcast called Vidal Speaks. It is here on this show where I want to teach you all that I learned in my 20-year homeopathic clinical practice, where I was faced with many health challenges of my patients. I learned really early in my practice that what patients were eating was contributing to most of their symptoms and disease processes. But I also learned early on in my practice how few people are really willing to change their diet and take the meat and dairy out of their life. These foods have an amazing stronghold on a person, and there were all kinds of reasons why they didn't want to change. For example, they would say they didn't believe the food was making them sick. Or another thing I heard was, my spouse and children are eating the same food and they don't have this disease, so it couldn't be my food. Or they read a book on the GAPS diet or paleo diet and they believe now that this is the healthiest diet. Or another one I heard that was a lot, it's just too expensive to eat vegan. Really? Anyway, there's millions of excuses why people say they can't go vegan. Another one I heard a lot was, it's just too hard to be social. I can't go out and eat at restaurants. These are just excuses because if you put your mind to it, you can do anything. And once you'd eat vegan for 30 days, you'd feel so different. It'd be hard to go back eating animals in such a high-fat, toxic diet. But the one excuse I want to prove wrong today is the one that eating vegan is too expensive, because my guest today is going to prove this statement wrong. She is Ellen Jaffe Jones, and one of her best-selling books is called Eating Vegan on $4 a Day. Now, who can't do that? Ellen used to work in the world of finances, so she actually calculated every single cost of each ingredient of the recipes in her book, and she can show you how to eat vegan on $4 a day. So this isn't just an estimate, this is for real. Many people say this all the time, oh, I just love to be vegan, but it's just too expensive. I'm so tired of hearing that. Just like the line, where do you get your protein from if you're vegan? Yeah, that gets old too. But you know what? You can eat vegan on a budget. And yes, all vegans can get enough protein on this diet. If you really think about it, a vegan diet consists of thousands of choices of food, unlike the limited choices of animal foods. And out of these thousands of foods, some will be expensive, of course, some moderate, and others are very affordable. But the trick is to learn what foods you can afford with your budget. And once you learn that, you learn ways to get a small amount of those expensive foods in there once in a while. Ellen teaches you many of these tricks in her book. So if you're on a budget, I highly recommend her book to start your vegan journey. Or even if you're a longtime vegan already, she's going to help you stick to that budget. Animal products are so expensive, so when people tell me they can't afford to eat vegan, yet they're eating some kind of animal product at every meal, whether it's butter, dairy, milk, yogurt, cheese, meat, the many different kinds of meat, I don't see how they come to this conclusion because animal products are not cheap to buy at the market, even when they are subsidized. But with all that in mind, you have to take into consideration how much you're spending on pharmaceuticals for all the symptoms you're treating, which likely, by the way, would be gone with a healthy, whole foods, plant-based vegan diet. Plus, how much are your future heart attacks going to cost? Or your stroke, how much will that cost you? Or all the future diabetic medication and doctor visits, how much is that going to cost you? I always say that my real health insurance is what I spend on my food. And that other insurance I pay for, I call that my sick insurance. And the goal is to invest in good health by buying the best plant-based food you can afford. But also many of the healthiest foods that are vegan are so cheap, like beans, for example. You can live on rice and beans, and they're so inexpensive, yet the rewards they bring to your health are huge. I think you're going to love today's show so you can hear how easy it is to afford to eat a healthy vegan diet. And yes, Ellen can teach you how to do it on $4 a day. But also, you're going to hear how the health of other family members should influence you to make choices to eat a vegan diet. Because once you've seen how your mom or dad or even older siblings have suffered, well, there just comes a point where you need to realize that you're the next in line unless you do something very different. Remember this, what we eat is the single biggest factor that affects our health. And when we eat a vegan diet, we make the biggest impact on our environment too. So it's a win-win. Okay, I'm ready for you guys to meet Ellen. But first, let me tell you a little bit about her. Ellen Jaffe Jones is an inspiring motivational speaker, personal trainer, running coach, author, and instructor of healthy cooking classes. As a former investigative reporter and anchor for 18 years in major market TV news, Ellen won 2 Emmys and the National Press Club Award. She became known as the Earth Mother in a Suit when she left TV and became a successful Wall Street financial consultant for 5 years. She wrote her first book, Eat Vegan on $4 a Day, after seeing too many news stories saying eating healthy was impossible on a budget. Ellen is an accomplished endurance and sprint runner and has won 104 5K plus age group awards since 2006. She placed 7th in the U.S. National Senior Games, and Ellen was also named PETA's Sexiest Vegan over 50. She combined all of her skill sets with her latest release, Vegan Fitness for Mortals. Recognizing that fitness and diet are two sides of the same coin, Ellen developed routines for a variety of activities along with dietary recommendations that augment fitness, a winning combination designed to help anyone achieve a healthier lifestyle. Her other titles include Kitchen Divided, which was written for vegans who are sharing a kitchen with an omnivore, and her other book, Paleo Vegan, which was co-authored with Alan Rodinger. Ellen researched different versions of paleo diets on the market and was able to combine the essence of the paleo diet with vegan principles in a 100% vegan cookbook. Ellen's other books include Vegan Sex and Vegan for One. Ellen is a certified personal trainer by the nationally recognized Aerobics and Fitness Association of America and a certified coach with the Road Runners Club of America. She speaks at numerous veg fests across the country. All right, you guys, you ready? You can zip that wallet up because you're going to save some money listening to this one today. Here we go. Hi, Ellen. Welcome to the Vidal Speaks podcast. I really look forward to our chat today because I'm so sick and tired of hearing that vegan or being vegan or eating vegan is just too expensive. And you're the expert to prove this wrong because you wrote a book on eating vegan $4 a day. So thanks for joining me today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
And first of all, I want to tell everyone that you were, I think, 2014 Sexiest Vegan of the Year. So now I've had a bunch of sexy vegans on my show.
Oh boy, you can never have too many, in my opinion, yeah.
And speaking of sex, you just wrote a book with Dr. Joel called Vegan Sex. I want to talk to you a little bit about that later, if that's okay.
Oh, totally.
But congratulations on that. Another book for you, Ellen. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
All right, let's start off by talking a little bit about your story so people know your background. I think it's pretty amazing. You came from a TV news person to Wall Street to a personal trainer, an athlete, an author. So tell us a little bit about this journey.
Well, it all started when I was 5 years old. The short story is that's when my aunt died of breast cancer in our home, and my mom and both sisters would go on to get breast cancer. And then because we were fairly well known in St. Louis, both my sister and I led very public lives, the cancer story became rather public, and we got approached by someone who was a researcher at Washington University who knew somebody who was working on the original breast cancer gene studies for Myriad Genetics. And so our entire family participated in that study, and it was really quite something. My sister, who had had breast cancer at that point, the only way they could get blood from her was during surgery, and she was having reconstructive surgery, so I had to take her blood sample in a refrigerated box out to the airport to fly it back within a short period of time. So and they talked about exhuming graves of relatives. Our family did not approve of that.
Wow.
But it was a really, really interesting time for sure. So before that, though, I was 28 years old, and I had been eating the standard American diet when I could. I was a television investigative reporter and had very little time to catch food on the road, but when I did, it was all fast food and garbage. And we had a snowstorm in St. Louis, and the station knew that a lot of us would be stranded there, so they went out thinking they were doing a good thing and brought in all this highly processed meats and cheeses, and I didn't drink enough water, and within a couple of days of that, collapsed on the newsroom floor, and they scraped me up and took me to the emergency room, and I almost died of a colon blockage. Fortunately, I didn't, and would go on to have 3 children, natural childbirth style, and that colon blockage caused more pain than anything in childbirth. And the doctors in the ER said, you need to be on medicine the rest of your life. We've never seen such a blockage in somebody who's so young, and that it's so large, and so you're just going to need to be on medicine. So I ran to the health food store, read all 5 books on fiber, because that's all there was at the time. Mm-hmm. And it was the same time my sister got breast cancer for the second time. And I first went macrobiotic, then vegetarian, and then vegan. And during that time, I heard Dr. Neil Barnard speak in St. Louis for the first time. Some of the early Ringling Brothers circus videos were making their way into various organizations that were showing them. And, the lights started going off about that time.
Yeah, once you kind of get exposed to the idea of a vegan diet or just even a plant-based diet, if that's what people call it, eventually I think they get to the point also about the animal aspect of it. And we'll probably talk a little bit about that. But that study that they were doing on your family when it was kind of in the public, did it teach you anything? Like, did you learn anything profound from it?
Well, the thing with most studies like that is because of confidentiality reasons, they don't tell you the results. So none of us ever knew at that point whether we had the gene. But I figured I might and live my life from that point on as if I did. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago when the Affordable Care Act made it no longer a pre-existing condition. In the unlikely event I did get breast cancer, if it showed up positive in genetic testing, it would have been considered a pre-existing condition. So it wasn't until that went out the window at least for a short time, that I went and got myself tested. And that's when I found out my sisters were right. I did get all the good genes, and I still didn't change how I was doing anything. So.
And did your sister have the gene? Are you talking about the BRCA gene?
Yeah, the BRCA1 and BRCA2, both of those were tested. I have no idea. Unfortunately, my oldest sister, who hadn't had breast cancer yet, had diabetes and heart disease, and she went in for routine herniated disc surgery as a result of being morbidly obese and flatlined on the table, and MRSA got into the IV, and she became a quadriplegic and lived the rest of her 6 miserable years of life in a nursing home. So
Wow, what a story.
That's why I'm just so passionate about how all these dots are so connected. And
Yeah, and in those stories, they're not so far and few between. I had a classmate in high school who I just recently heard, and he was very obese, had rheumatoid arthritis, actually psoriatic arthritis, and went in for a back surgery and also died on the table. So it's kind of not as unusual as people think. And the whole connection, when you start looking, even if you didn't have a family history filled with diabetes and heart attacks, there's still a great reason today to eat a vegan diet. But man, many people have that, and that's a wake-up call, and not enough are doing enough soon enough, I would say. I'm a homeopathic practitioner, and I would see so many people. It's like they're coming to you so sick already that it's like, oh my gosh, it's such a big road to turn around. But I mean, any stage you can start, it's helpful. But the sooner you start, just the easier it is.
Yeah, and I was so inspired by the books that I read at the time. I went to the health food store and tried to bring my middle sister, the one who had breast cancer sooner and has had it multiple times, some foods, the dark greens, like dandelion greens and beans and whole grains and all that. And she just really took offense at it and said, how dare you undermine the way I've chosen to treat my cancer. And, I wasn't suggesting she not do chemo or radiation. She'd already had it at that point. But it taught me a lot. I would go on to become a trained cooking instructor for Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine's The Cancer Project, and taught for them for 6 years before I started getting the ideas to write my own books. And you'd asked about my journey. When I left television, I spent 18 years as a TV investigative reporter in Miami and St. Louis, and won a couple of Emmys and the National Press Club Award. And then when they had said that 40 was never too young to have a facelift, and the more often I would have them at a younger age, the more effective they would be, I knew at that point, because one of my sisters had had a facelift, and the surgeon who was her best friend accidentally dropped the scalpel within a millimeter of her carotid artery. So a facelift was not anything I was ever thinking I would do.
Yeah.
And so, at that point, I began exploring other careers, and I knew a couple of people who worked for some Wall Street firms, and I took the entry-level test just to see if I could even pass some of the types of tests that you need to be licensed in that industry. And once I passed, I had offers from all kinds of different Wall Street firms, because at that time there were so few women in that industry. And to some extent that is true, still true today. But I did that for 5 years. I was the #1 market performer in my branch. I focused on socially responsible investing, which the legal definition of that is avoiding tobacco, alcohol, and firearms in portfolios.
Right.
And for those who want it, the additional screen of not having companies that test on animals. So that's kind of where I was known as a Earth Mother in a suit, and had a lot of success in gathering assets, as the firm expression goes. But what I became convinced of the more I did it is the more honest and transparent you were for clients, the better you did for them in terms of their performance. It was inversely correlated to how well I did for myself. And I never made more than $25,000 a year in the 5 years that I did that business. So that's when I did media. I decided to use my media background and do media training, and started doing that, and that's how I connected up with Dr. Barnard and did media training for some of his staff members and some of the doctors who have now gone on to write their own books and are out there on the lecture circuit.
Yeah, and he's been on the show, Dr. Barnard. What a great person he is. He's a good soul, and just all the great work he's been doing over the years. So
Yeah.
it's really fantastic. And then your athletic training, was that just a passion of yours?
Well, that was kind of an accident. I had been running about the same time I got sick when I was 28. And I tried to run actually before that when I lived in Miami and I was a reporter there. But the beaches there were very sloped and the sand was coarse. And I really just didn't like running on concrete. And that time was really before we knew much about orthotics and how they could kind of correct biomechanical imbalances that a lot of people have in the body. Sometimes you can correct that through exercise, but sometimes you can't. And I had untreated scoliosis, and one leg was longer than another, and all that kind of fun stuff. So orthotics really helped me to start running in my late 20s. But I did a few races in my 30s and 40s and never placed, and kind of gave it up when my kids were young. And then when they were out of the house and I moved to Florida, I woke up one morning and heard a gun blast out my window, and I thought either somebody's dead or that was a race starting. And sure enough, it was a 5K race in a park across the street. And I wandered over there, and I am still friends with the woman who I happened to bump into and asked the question, how do people run in Florida? Because it's so hot.
Yeah.
So she said, get up at sunrise. And that advice has served me very well. And I trained on my own for a year, and then I got enough guts to join the local running club and train with them. And then after a year of that, somebody there said, you know, you probably do pretty well at a race. Why don't you enter one? And that was in 2006. And I found out that often I kind of joke that I win my age group just by showing up. And
That's good.
it's not entirely true, but so in 2006 I started running and have now placed in 117 5K or longer races for my age group. I just got back from the National Senior Games where I placed third in the U.S. in my age group, which is 65 to 69. And I placed third in the 4x1 100-meter relays and fifth in the 800, seventh in the 1500 and the 400, and did respectably in the shorter distances like the 100 and the 50 meters, although those are definitely not my events. You really have to have a lot of
really
turnover.
Something to be proud of. Good for you. That's great. I know what you mean when you say that about Florida, because as an LPGA golfer for 11 years, I worked with Coach David Ledbetter, who was in Orlando, and I had to live there for about probably 5 years, and
Wow.
it was tough. Although I was on the road playing the tour 48 weeks a year, I'd still come home for weekends and the couple months off to work with him. But man, yeah, the humidity there is really tough. And I was a runner because it's something you could do when you were on the road in a different city every week. All you needed were your shoes. But eventually with my back issues, it just got where I do other things now, and I live in LA, so I hike and I love that. So everyone has to have their exercise passion because it is so important. And I knew that you had a running passion, so that's a cool story, and it all makes sense now. So thanks for sharing that. The main subject I would like to talk about today is this myth about how eating vegan is so expensive. And I love that book that you wrote that's called Eating Vegan for $4 a Day. So why don't you tell us a little bit about why you wrote that and about the book in general?
Well, fortunately, I have had this really varied career. First, as a journalist, and I went to the University of Missouri School of Journalism, and I often joke it's the degree that keeps on giving. And learned kind of at a young age that you got to be prepared to diversify, and there are no guarantees in this life. And certainly, as a woman in television, I was blessed to be told by a couple of news directors early on that I looked young for my age and I would have a long career in television, which I did for the Times. But when I went to Smith Barney, I was really thinking, how am I going to pull these math genes out of my head when I've been a writer for 2 decades? so what somebody told me at Smith Barney is that it is not a numbers business. It's all about marketing. It's all about gathering assets. And if you need to know something about math, just go to the computer or ask somebody else. And so that's what I did. But it was during that time, those 5 years at Smith Barney, where I really got the idea to crunch the numbers for every single recipe to really prove how ridiculously cheap it is to eat a vegan diet. And I thought that nobody else had ever done that before, and if I could just figure out how to do that, that would be a really cool cookbook. And sure enough, in 2008, there was a software program called Living Cookbook. So I spent a couple of years around that time just tracking all the prices at the big box store of any potential ingredient that might go into a cookbook filled with recipes to do just this. So this was back in the days before smartphones really, and I used the old-fashioned Excel spreadsheet and wrote down all those numbers over a period of months of the price of beans and grains and all that. And so the way it worked is if I would enter into the software the price of oats at a nickel an ounce, and I used 4 ounces in the recipe, it would multiply it up and then divide it by the number of servings. So that's how I came out with an estimated price for every single recipe in that book. And I had a wonderful agent who spent a year trying to sell the book, and she had been the agent for the series of books that came out in the 90s called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff Because Everything is Small Stuff. Right. And her name is Patty Brightman. She's an author of her own right now. I think her most recent book is It's Never Too Late to Go Vegan, or maybe that's her second to last book. But anyway, she was just so disappointed. She thought, it was going to be just a huge seller. It was the best money-making idea she had heard of in a long time. And she wanted it to be kind of a backdoor vegan book, as did I. And the original title was Eat Well on $3 a day. So that gives you an idea. We had to actually up the price by the time it got published to $4 a day. And my publisher, the one who picked it up, turns out to be the largest vegan publisher in the U.S. And they've been doing this for 40 years, first as vegetarian and then as vegan. But they've pretty much published a lot of the national authors that are on the lecture circuit today doing the subject.
And who are they?
Well, Neil Barnard actually was with them. He's got like 20 books out now.
Yeah.
But, and John McDougall, Digestive Tune-Up is with them. Joe Stepaniak has about 17 books out, and one of the first books, and it was really bizarre because I realized when I went with this publisher that I had read some of their books already. Joe Stepaniak wrote the Uncheese book when nobody was talking about getting off dairy. Tofu Cookery is another one of theirs.
Interesting. What's the name of that publisher?
The Book Publishing Company. They're out of Summertown, Tennessee. They're otherwise known as The Farm. And it was a bunch of, the story there is fascinating, just briefly, a bunch of hippies from San Francisco just got in a bunch of vans and started driving, ended up in Tennessee where they could get a lot of real estate for nothing. And they basically set it up as a commune. And anybody, at one point they had 3,000 people living there. They're now down to about, I think, 600. But they went from this, anybody can live here no matter what you're doing, to if you want to live here, you got to do something to come up with an income. But everything of theirs was known, had the word "the" in front of it. So that was based on their name, The Farm. So The Book Company. They had a mail order company that was called The Mail Order Company. Stuff like that. So they're pretty well known in the vegan universe, and a lot of those folks now are into their 60s and 70s who still live on the farm. I just recently went there in the last year to see it, and it was really like going to Mecca.
Wow, it sounds really cool. That's a great story about them, and I love how publishing companies kind of stick with the theme of veganism or whatever. That's kind of nice. Makes you feel good. It makes you feel good about having your work with a company that kind of stands for what you stand for.
Exactly. And I, at first I felt I was cringing about putting the word vegan in the title of Eat Vegan on $4 a day, but they were very adamant that they wanted to be honest and forthright, and they didn't want people to buy the book and find out later that it was vegan and feel disappointed or angry about that. So,
Yeah.
I think in retrospect, and it also at that time, Bill Clinton was going vegan, and the word vegan was all of a sudden morphing from just animal rights nutcases to, oh, wow, this is a really healthy way to eat.
Yeah.
So that's really how the book got born. And it was very accidental where my agent, Patty, saw my publisher at the San Francisco Veg Fest and said, I've been shopping this book title around for an entire year. Nobody wants it. So if you do, it's going to be on your desk shortly. So they picked it up, and it's just been a great ride. And, people always are asking me, especially when I wear my Eat Vegan on $4 a day t-shirt to races, people just come up to my chest and go like, yeah, right. Or how?
I know. And I have my own ideas, but why do you think that myth is so strong about you can't do it?
Well, I think they think we're just all a bunch of elite, yuppie, leftover hippies who are doing nothing but spending all of our incredible amounts of disposable incomes at Whole Foods. And, knock yourself out. If you want to do that, you certainly can and eat quite well. But, the main reason I wrote the book, as a consumer reporter, which was also part of my title as an investigative reporter, I was following the Consumer Price Index for years. And I knew what the price of foods was. And I knew that beans were very cheap and hadn't gone up pretty much in 30 years. And also whole grains. If you buy whole grains in their natural state, they're going to be ridiculously cheap. So my thought was, if people throw out the meat and dairy and replace that with whole grains and beans, they're going to have plenty of money left over to buy the produce. And I even have tips in the book how to do it organically, although people always, will say things to me like, well, can you do organics on $4 a day? And I go, yeah. If you join a CSA, which is a community-supported agriculture farm, you get a work share with them, which gives you access to their weekly crops of food that they pick. And you can get it either at a reduced price, or if you volunteer enough hours, you can get the food for free. And that's not only true at a CSA, but any farm co-op where they ask for community involvement, if you can find one. And there's a great website called localharvest.org. And if you type in your zip code or just click on the national map there, you can find any local farm, including a CSA near you. So, I just really wanted to disprove the myth that it's this elite, expensive way to eat. It just doesn't have to be. It can be. Just like with anything, you can throw all kinds of money at it.
Of course. And I think sometimes people lump words together. Like sometimes they think they confuse, and they think that all vegans eat organic. So they're thinking it's expensive because they're thinking more of organic. And if you just go and you bought, let's say you fed your whole family and you're just feeding them all veggies, all organic veggies, and you're not supplementing with cheaper foods like beans and lentils. Okay, for a family of 4, maybe that could get expensive, but it's not the only way to eat like that. And it isn't, our diet should consist of a variety of foods. And I think the other big problem in my mind is the government. They just do this on purpose. They subsidize the meat and dairy industry. And so you really can get a fast food burger for 99 cents, $1.99, whatever these specials are. And they do make it difficult to go buy a head of broccoli sometimes for families. They feel overwhelmed about that. But you got to learn the whole formula. It's not just about the veggies, or not just about the fruits or the berries. It's about learning how to bring in a few of these and balance them out with the other things so that it can be affordable, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And the real answer is to how you do it, besides replacing the meat and dairy with the beans and grains, is shopping the perimeter of the store where the least processed foods are, looking high and low, because the manufacturers are paying top dollar for you to see foods at eye level. So the discounted foods might be out of your range of vision. And then, cooking from scratch, that's another big tip that I have. And people say, ew, I don't have time to cook from scratch. I don't have time to cook. And I go, well, you don't have time for heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. Those are real time wasters. I have grown up in hospitals watching my relatives get really sick or really dead. And it is just tragic that entire generations are losing each other and don't even know it. You know, my parents were so sick and diseased by the time I had kids, they couldn't pick up my kids, let alone babysit them. And I'm the youngest in my family. Neil Barnard is the youngest in his family, and I've met other vegan doctors on the lecture circuit who have had this perspective of seeing what's ahead if you don't change. And as one of my doctors said, you better do some things differently or you're going to end up like everybody else. And it was totally true, and I was glad I had a doctor in my late 20s saying that kind of thing. And interestingly enough, 4 of my cousins have gone vegan as a result of knowing my family of origin and then seeing how differently my life has turned out.
Yeah, and it sometimes is the hardest that the very family members that are sick are the ones that avoid switching over or converting to a vegan diet. And who knows why that is when you're such an expert that they could have a family coach. But sometimes it is that way, and it's also a lesson for us to learn to stand back and not judge people and let go, because it's difficult to watch someone with an illness take a path that you feel is going to be a dead-end road for them, and then to be quiet and just watch it is not easy.
Yeah, that's just such an important point. I could probably do a whole hour just on that one topic alone, but just very briefly, in my book, Vegan Sex, by the way, I call all of my past marriages and relationships my ex. So we're not identifying anybody to protect their privacy and all that. But one of my exes was not vegan, and he had a heart attack and came within an hour of dying and was in cardiac rehab, regaining all of his bodily functions and everything else as best he could. That took 30 days. And the nurses told us, and I was there all that entire time. I canceled all my speaking engagements and everything. And the nurses told us that visit, 30 days in cardiac rehab, if Medicare hadn't paid for it, would have cost $1 million. That's $1 million, whether Medicare pays for it, insurance companies, corporations, individuals, and that's not sustainable. I mean, we've got to nip this one, or it's going to be such a problem, more so than it already is. It really will bankrupt our country.
For sure, it is. I mean, and it's failing the medical system because everybody's griping right now about the healthcare plan and the healthcare bill. But the truth is, with the cost per person in our country of what people need for all their doctor visits and to try to manage or put Band-Aids on all their horrible symptoms with these pharmaceuticals, we can't even sustain that. So I always say, the first way to do it is get everybody to eat better so that we don't have these diseases to treat, and then the bill would be easy.
Yeah, exactly. And, so many cardiologists in particular get that just so incredibly preventable.
It is.
But, one of the things, to your point previously, in the cardiac rehab experience, the head of the department came around one night and said, both to my ex and I, just understand that spouses, in particular husbands, don't listen to their wives.
Wow.
That line has just stayed with me because it's really true. Families are the hardest group of individuals to convince because they are so grounded and rooted in their beliefs. I would often see in my cooking classes that I did before my books took off, and I became more on the lecture circuit than being a homebody, but I would see these people would get so desperate on their deathbeds, and sometimes that's when the light can go off. Mm-hmm. There was one woman who lost 120 pounds in 8 months, never counting a calorie. She loved the food, just ate the recipes from the book. And she had been diagnosed with multiple myeloma, one of the more fatal forms of bone cancer, and had been given up for dead when she came to my class 12 years ago. She's still alive and is a raving vegan. Those kinds of things.
That's a cancer that's getting a lot of people. My partner and I have had a few friends die of that just in the last few years.
Wow.
I know, it's terrible. It's great incentive. I always say that my personal health insurance is the money I spend on my food to eat.
Exactly.
It's not what I pay Blue Cross for my health insurance, which is a ripoff because I don't even use it. But,
exactly.
And then I just wondered about nuts and say like fruits now, or let's even say berries, because these are foods that are really expensive. Nuts, not all seeds, but nuts in general, and berries. Do you have any way to incorporate those into the $4 a day, or is that without those?
Oh, no, it definitely includes those. And I have just all kinds of tips how to shop, what to look for, and when to prepare the food so it doesn't go to waste. All the recipes in the book were developed when I was a single working mom, and all I wanted to do was get food on the table in a hurry for my kids. So in terms of nuts and seeds, sometimes I feel like if I look at a nut, I gain weight, and I've had a weight problem ever since high school. And when I did the McDougall maximum weight loss plan for me, using sweet potatoes as my main carb and starch, the weight just melted off. So you have to figure out what works best for you. I just don't eat a lot of nuts and seeds. And for those who want to eat them, certainly spreading them over a cereal or in a smoothie in 1 or 2 tablespoon amounts is not going to break the bank. And you can certainly juggle this. Because I was a consumer reporter, I have some financial planning tips. There's the chapter is even called Financial Food Planning, where you actually put the cash you have for the week in a drawer, and that's what you use. And when you run out of that cash to buy your food or for whatever your budget is, then you go knocking on a neighbor's door for dinner. There just are ways that you can control the amount of money you spend and decide what it is that's important to you. As far as berries, buying them when they're in season, when they're fresh, it's going to be cheaper than buying them frozen, and then you can freeze them yourself if you want. That's one way. Or what I do is I just buy the big bag of berries, sometimes organic, sometimes not. And the studies would show that it's better to eat a plant-based diet that is conventional and not organic than to eat one with meat and dairy that is organic, because there's so many different reasons that's true. So if you buy a big bag of berries and you can just apportion out what you're going to eat for your cereal or your smoothie, wherever you're using it, you can make it stretch, as I like to say.
So while you take a little break, I'm going to tell you that my call to action today is for you to share this podcast with your friends. If you would post your favorite episode to your Facebook or Twitter page, or even a little Instagram message saying that you love that episode, I will give you a big thank you for this. Sharing the show just allows us to keep healing the world. And God knows there's so many out there that are sick and need this info. If you know anyone fighting any mystery illness or having cancer or struggling with their health, please tell them about this podcast, because it can be life-changing for them. Lastly, you guys, have you tried any of the 100% beauty products that I tell you about? Oh my gosh, I love these products so much. I just bought a few more items last week. I'm in love with this stuff. One of them was this hair mask. It was so awesome. Everything I've tried from their line is just something I love. You feel like you want to eat them, and they're clean enough to do that. So please check them out, and do that by going to my website, and under the tab that's titled Shop, you'll find their link there, and it'll take you right to their website. Please try their stuff. It's really my favorite. Lastly, thanks to those of you guys out there using that Amazon banner. I love you and I so appreciate that. So I just want to shout out a big thank you to all of you. Okay, now back to the show. Yeah, and I liked in your book, you have this guacamole recipe and you used just one avocado, but then you added other things like peas and I forget what else was in there, onion or something like that, radish, and that's another way to do it, because then the avocado people might say is expensive, but if you're only using one and you're using all these other things to fill it up and it still tastes yummy, then what a great way. You've have a big bowl of guacamole and you set the price of one avocado.
Yeah, the guacamole made with green peas, I mean, you can't tell really where the peas and the avocado start. So that's absolutely one way. And then, of course, just stretching any recipe with any whole grain, whether it's rice or millet. I love millet because it's a bright yellow and it reminds me of butter. And we all have our little addictions, so.
Yeah. I just did this show for Jane Velez Mitchell. She does this show called Lunch Break Live, and it's a little cooking show, 15 minutes, that she does daily at lunch. And I made this better than tuna. And I made it with sunflower seeds and almonds and 2 or 3 Brazil nuts, but it's probably 3/4 sunflower seeds, 1/4 almonds, and then 2 or 3 Brazil nuts. But hey, if you are on a budget, I mean, sunflower seeds are cheap. Brazil nuts, you only need 2 or 3. Who can't afford that? But if almonds are expensive, so leave them out or put 4 almonds in. I mean, there's just a way that you can still make it work, and you can find replacements of something else. I mean, you can do it out of chickpeas. You don't want to do it out of nuts, no problem. And I said that in the show. But I think that the trick is that when you become vegan in the very beginning, you don't feel creative because you feel completely lost because you're so far away from your usual menu and your usual ingredients. But I think the longer you get in it, you start feeling confident to replace things. Don't you agree, though? I think that's a thing a lot of people told me, that they just felt like they didn't know what to do. They just need to follow a recipe from A to Z.
Right. And, what's so wonderful now is that you can pretty much veganize everything. There's vegan mayonnaise, there's vegan eggs, there's vegan plant-based milks of all sizes, tastes, and shapes. So not to mention, if people say something like, well, I don't like vegetables or something, it's like there's hundreds of vegetables. If you don't like one variety within a species, try another one. An example of that is I used to hate beet greens until I tried from our CSA the candy cane variety of beets. And I went back the next week to the farmer and I said, these beets taste salty and sweet to me. What's up with that? And especially the greens. And if you know this variety of beets, it's like it's a variegated red and white. I mean, they really do look like candy canes, and they're beautiful. And he said, no, that's just the variety. It's not the soil. It's just the way that particular variety is. So if you don't like one, there's so many different colors of the rainbows in the plant-based kingdom. And in the animal kingdom, it's pretty much brown, brown, and brown, unless it's black from being barbecued, in which case it's going to have heterocyclic amines and cause cancer. So really just a great reason to only eat plants, because they really are the one-stop shop for everything you need for a healthy diet. And you certainly can find all kinds of ways to stretch the bottom line if you need to do that. In my cooking classes, sometimes we'd have 20 more people show up than registered. So I really did get to be quite an expert of making things stretch and go a long way. And you certainly you won't die of malnutrition, I promise.
That's for sure. And I loved how you mentioned about one of the ways to save money is cook yourself at home, because honestly, this is one of my pet peeves. I just, as a homeopathic practitioner in the last 20 years and seeing people come so sick, I'm appalled how little people cook and how little they even know how to cook, how they have no desire to cook. And it's like, I don't know what the prescription of health could be without you cooking at home. I don't know if it can happen unless you have so much money that you can afford to know where you're going, that it's organic and they're using whole foods or whatever. But it's so risky to eat out all the time, and it's so bad for you. So it's really happy to hear that that's a money saver.
Yeah, absolutely. And now there are all these gadgets out there, like the Instant Pots, where you can throw everything in one pot, and you only need, their marketing claim is you only need that on top of your counter, nothing else, because you can pressure cook in it, you can saute, you can cook just old-fashioned with a lid on the top, and no pressure. So there are lots of different recipes, and they even have a Bluetooth-enabled Instapot where you just go online and pick out the recipe and click the button, and it goes into autopilot. So you don't even have to think about cooking. It's got the recipe programmed into it already, which is just, to me, that's a little over the top.
Yeah.
But pressure cooking beans is a great tip, because you can have a week's worth of beans sitting in your fridge at a ridiculous price. The price at a big box store is still like a nickel an ounce for pinto beans, for example. And so one serving of pinto beans is about a dime, because 2 ounces cooks up into 4 ounces. And then you compare that to the price of hamburger meat, the cheapest form of hamburger meat, which is 30% fat and 70% pink slime or whatever. And, that's like 30 cents an ounce, so or more, depending, what kind of cut you're getting. And then the more expensive cuts of meat are really through the roof. Like sometimes $16 for a 4-ounce serving. So, and that's just at like Walmart. We're not even talking about a restaurant. So
Yeah, so you're basically taking the meat and the dairy and you're replacing it with beans and grains. And right there, that's probably like a 90% savings.
exactly.
Yeah, and then you supplement your plate with other things, fresh veggies or fruits or nuts or whatever amounts of smaller amounts of the other things. That's a cool way to look at it. You're kind of taking the meat and the dairy, and of the meat and the dairy of the plant world, definitely the meat is kind of either, I always think of meat in the vegan world as portobello mushrooms or some of these great mushrooms, could be meat replacements, although they're not always the cheapest. So beans for sure, grains for sure. And then I always like to say, look, those meat replacements, they help a lot of people along the way in the transition. They're still processed. They're not always the best, but you know what? If that gets people there and they need a fast meal, I'd rather see that than someone pounding down butter and yogurt and milk and a big chunk of animal flesh.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things at Summerfest, where I was just at, that came out, there were 2 different dietitians who were speaking about, there's new information about soy, that it's not the bad apple the meat and dairy industry would like it to be. There's actually quite a number of studies now that show that it's like my friend Miyoko Shinner, who wrote the book Artisan Vegan Cheese, by the way, that's with my publisher. And she came out with her own line of cheese called Miyoko's Kitchen, or Creamery, and it's Miyoko's Kitchen. I think she uses both in the product branding. But she was saying how it just drives her crazy. And this was before the new research that's out, because, in her culture, she says, Ellen, we've been eating soy in the form, in its more natural form, like edamame and tofu, minimally processed tofu, for millennia. And it's just not causing cancer the way it is for people who eat the standard American diet. So she always gets a lot of eye rolling going on when people ask her the soy question. So
sadly, there's a lot of doctors out there with big names that are promoting this anti-soy movement, which is so sad. And a lot of it, to me, in my opinion, came from the Weston Price industry.
yeah, absolutely.
Because of the big fear that milk was falling down, and they're sponsored by the dairy industry. So they had to promote how bad soy was. And then when you have big doctors following their diet and saying the same thing, and it's like in any field, but in homeopathy, we have a lot of misinformation that just keeps getting repeated over in books because people just copy it from one book to the next.
Yeah, I think, people ask me, well, how do you know what is true these days? And I say, stick to the mainstream vegan doctors who've been saying these same messages for decades, like Neil Barnard and John McDougall and Caldwell Esselstyn, all these folks. They have little variations on a theme, but basically it's a whole foods, plant-based diet. And what did Mother Nature intend? What did our ancestors really do? They weren't running around stomping on olives to, glog the oil into their arteries. It's foods in their natural state. And the whole thing, as an investigative reporter, the big thing is follow the money, and you can see some of these studies and who's behind them. And as I say in Eat Vegan on $4 a day, when you understand there's no money in broccoli, there's no corporation that makes it, there's no broccoli association, no broccoli lobby, then you have to understand you've got to be your own investigative reporter to figure out the truth about food. And as a reporter, I used to cringe at book authors who would come through the door, like, what are they trying to sell? What's their hidden agenda? And we all were kind of cranky about that. But as I went to the dark side and then began to write my own books, I'm doing it because I have 3 daughters. And the odds are 1 in 4 of us will get breast cancer. Mm-hmm. And even without the gene floating around, it's just there are other things.
Stuff, food, diet stuff, just toxins. It's so many reasons. You're right. And I think what you just said is really important for people to know, because it just feels like sometimes you have to also use your intuition. Like I say to myself, does that really make any sense? I played a lot of golf in Japan. I know their diet. I know their history. I had many, many very close Japanese friends. And I would say, does it really make any sense that a culture who's consumed that much soy for that many years, that this suddenly could be a food that is going to cause us to have cancer and be so toxic? It doesn't make any sense. It's not logical. And I think the same for the paleo movement saying all this about beans and grains. Doesn't make sense.
Well, I wrote the book Paleo Vegan, and in part of that was just a response to the whole paleo craze, which when I started looking at it 6 or 7 years ago, as a runner, I'm going like, this is Atkins all over again. It's just cleaned up and a little polished, but it's the only thing that's different is the way it's being marketed with a different name. And it made my head explode. So on one of the pages of that book, I have a list of foods that's common to both the paleo and a vegan diet, 100% vegan. And people were like angry with me for writing that book.
I have that book, and I saw some of those reviews. It's amazing how angry some of these paleo people.
And my response is, hey, what gave meat eaters the right to define and claim the paleo diet? And National Geographic, a year after my book came out, agreed with me. This was crazy, in a cover story called The Real Paleo Diet. And I have it sticky noted when I run around on the lecture circuit, and I show about a dozen different places in that article where they agreed and pretty much quoted out of my book, not by attribution, of course, but saying things. It wasn't like a wild boar was running through our backyard 3 times a day and we could catch it successfully and then eat it without getting sick and dying, number one. Number two, the world can't sustain a diet based around meat and dairy. They said that. And they called the current meat-based paleo books, quote, a stew of misconceptions. And that's really just how I saw it. And, it wasn't like there was Instagram back a million years ago that could truly document the way people were eating. But the reality is the success rate of current hunter-gatherer tribes, and National Geographic got into this as well, is only about 50% once every week or two. There's only 2 tribes left in Africa that still do that. So it's thought that in true Paleolithic times, the success rate was even less. And so what was the choice? You just had to eat what was around. And the women who were back home with the babies and the kids, while their elusive man went out to hunt, they were all about foraging and gathering in their surroundings. And the funny thing is, when I travel a lot, and I'll be sitting next to somebody on a plane invariably who's doing paleo, and most of the paleo books, the popular ones, have this concept of up to a 20% cheat, because they understand that a true high protein diet is not sustainable long term. So I'll ask them, so what are you doing for your cheat? And they'll giggle and say ice cream and alcohol. So when I wrote Paleo Vegan, I said, if you guys want to cheat, beans and grains for 20% of the time is a lot better than alcohol and ice cream. So that's kind of my spin on the whole paleo diet.
That book. I love it. I have it. I love it. I think it's a great book, and it was right at the perfect timing. And Brenda Davis, who's been on my show, I love on her website that she has that chart where she shows the vegan diet is much closer and almost identical except for the meat part. But nutrient-wise, a vegan diet matches the real Paleolithic diets. And that's what most anthropologists would agree with. So this whole paleo thing about, killing the meat, we're so far away from doing that. And I had this guy on my show, Dr. Douillard, and he said that the paleo diet is just, we've swung from one side of the scale to the processed, packaged, high sugar, processed, sad diet, they're just going extreme to the other way. Now, no carbs, no beans, no grains, just swing completely against it and just eat all meat. And that makes sense. It's just so extreme and it's so wrong and it's so dangerous in my opinion. But I feel like the truth ultimately will win.
Yeah, it really is, I think, a matter of survival of the fittest. And when I was at the National Senior Games, more and more people are coming up to me and saying that they're vegan. And one of the things is that vegans really, it's a low inflammatory, very much an anti-inflammatory diet. So we typically don't get arthritis very much or at all. Our recovery is faster, and we just don't have a lot of the issues. Some of the women who used to beat me like crazy 10 years ago in 5K races aren't even running anymore because they have fallen into arthritis of the hips and everything else. So
Yeah, that's another reason, just the longevity of a vegan diet. So tell me a little bit about what are some good shopping tips, and what are some must-haves to put in our vegan pantry?
well, certainly beans and any whole grain you want, and any kind of bean, any kind of soup mixture that includes it. You can certainly buy the pre-made soup mixtures, or you can make your own for a lot less money, and just get as much variety within those two food groups as you can. And then, as needed, get fresh vegetables. I like to use a food processor and then put them in a glass container at eye level in the fridge. So that's the first thing I see when I open up my fridge and I'm kind of coming home from a long day and I want to get food on the table in a hurry. So they're already cut up. I'll do that like on Sunday, and then again maybe on Wednesday or Thursday. And having different sauces, you can have them pre-made if you want. You can get the jarred sauces and then just open them as you need it. I have 3 different veggie burger recipes in the book. They can be frozen before they are made up, once they're in patties, and then you can freeze them before you cook them. Or if you don't freeze them before you cook them, you can freeze them after you cook them. And I think that's really a great convenience, and to have those ready. We are, one of the things I didn't tell you, I was a La Leche League leader, breastfeeding information and support group. And, we're the only species that drinks milk from another species. So there's absolutely no reason, once a child is, in theory, weaned, for us to be drinking the fluid of another species. And, my research suggests that the reason that even happened was out on the desert somewhere, water was not available, and the fluid of another species looked darned enticing at the time. So totally, and that was only 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, so totally unnecessary to be doing the dairy thing. And there's just so many different plant-based milks.
Yeah.
You can make your own if you want to save some money with a cheesecloth, or just process the whole thing in a high-powered blender. I really recommend getting a high-powered blender, and I don't get any pennies for saying the name Vitamix, but it seems like so many of my chef friends keep coming back to Vitamix because they just have the best game in town, it seems, in terms of customer service. And a lot of them like as do I, the older ones, the narrower ones that have the bottom being narrower than the top, because the whirling propeller action seems to process the foods faster, if that is something, and more thoroughly. You don't have to keep opening the top to press the sides, scrape the sides down. So that's just one thing. And you can make all kinds of soups that way, or just do it from scratch. It really isn't that hard. Most of the recipes in Eat Vegan on $4 a day can be made in 10 minutes or less, with the exception of my chocolate surprise cake. And that's there are a number of recipes in that book, as well as my other book, Kitchen Divided, that are kind of stealth vegan recipes that your significant other may not have any clue, or your dinner party may not have any clue that it's vegan. So I like to sneak those in once in a while too.
Well, that's one of my other favorite books of yours, Kitchen Divided, because my best friend, Ellen, her husband's not vegan, and it can be an issue. And I had quite a few patients. They were female patients, and they really gave it a good effort to go vegan, but their family really, really resisted. So tell us a little bit about that book. What's the solution when you have a divided kitchen?
Well, it depends whether they're living with you or if they're just hopefully extended family that you don't have to see and cook for all the time. But I wrote it during the period of my life where I was in a mixed marriage, if you'll forgive the similarity there in religious terms and all that. But it almost was that way, as dedicated as we both were to our separate causes. But I just wanted to streamline the cooking process and make sure that it wasn't stressful, as much as you can eliminate that kind of stress when you have to deal with somebody else who is living in close quarters, eating very differently from you. So a lot of the recipes are items like they can be your entree, it can be a side dish for the meat eater, or it can be a main dish for both of you, but they lend themselves well into the meat eater plopping whatever meat, fish, whatever they want to put into theirs. So the idea is that you don't have to cook separate dishes, or that you both aren't in maybe a small kitchen at the same time, that you can still deal with getting food on the table for folks who eat differently. And I have lots of ideas on how to talk about it in a relationship, and how you set up the kitchen, the refrigerator, and the freezer, again, so you don't feel this growing resentment that some people experience when they don't talk about these things in advance.
Yeah, I think that's a very important book because there are a lot of people moving in the 100% plant-based diet or vegan diet, and their partners are not ready yet, and they may not be for some time or ever. And they really need to know how to deal with this, because I think it can be a relationship breaker eventually.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about your new book, Vegan Sex. Now everyone wants to hear about that.
That was Dr. Khan's idea, by the way.
I'm sure I knew that as soon as I saw it.
Yeah. Although somebody actually complained, it's like, I'm sick of plants being exploited for sexual organs. It's like, really? Well, like, send us the cover design you would like for our next edition.
Right.
But, anyway, but I got the idea to write it, about 2 years ago. As I say in my talks, I was a vegan virgin until I was 62. And I don't know how family friendly your audience is, but I did a show on this on mainstream radio just yesterday on a Fox network station that comes right after Rush Limbaugh. So I couldn't talk a whole lot of detail here, leaving a lot to the imagination, or people can just get the book and read all about it. The story is I had my first sexual encounter at the age of 62, and I was so blown away by the difference. Well, first of all, I just briefly will back up and say that I had some back problems that I thought might be running related. A prolapsed uterus was the initial diagnosis, so they sent me to a physical therapist. And as a runner, I've had all kinds of exams, but this was unlike no other. They did an internal probe and determined that after basically 30 years of not having intercourse, that my internal organs had atrophied, or the muscles, the surrounding tissue. So when I had my first encounter with a vegan, I could not believe the difference. And the part I write in this book is the personal experiential difference of 30 years with every single guy that I had been with one exception, from the age of 28, had erectile dysfunction. Every single one of them. So
Wow.
What I want my readers and followers and everybody to ask is, how might your relationship be different if a partner didn't have ED? And not that ED is 100% curable by a plant-based diet, but it's all about blood flow. And I think, as Dr. Khan so eloquently states in the book, in his 3 chapters on the science and the physiology of what is happening to, in particular, the male organ, basically it's about blood flow. And when blood flow is restricted to your heart, which is one of your bigger organs out there, it's also going to be very restricted in other parts of your body to your other organs. So I just throw this out there. If your partner had been vegan, what kind of difference would it have made in the relationship? I mean, ED is this insidious problem that it's sort of like this self-fulfilling prophecy. Once you get it, you think there's never any way out of it. In my research, I have met 70-year-old men who have thrown out their Viagra once they went vegan.
And it is amazing how much of the television ads are for that commercial, and how many millions of people take this drug to have sex.
Yes.
So.
And I worked at Smith Barney as a financial consultant when Viagra first came onto the market. And Dr. Khan describes in the book, from a medical perspective, it was designed to be a heart drug, and they found that it was having this amazing connection in particular in the male part of the anatomy. And unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of research done for women, but as Dr. Khan and I both point out in our talks, especially, that when you eat a plant-based diet, you're eating lots of water-rich fruits and vegetables. And here's the other thing, if I may just say, when I went to this physical therapist, I told her that I might be having intercourse for the first time in about 30 years, and she goes, "Oh my gosh, your tissues are thinned, it's going to be painful, it's going to be awful, buy some lubricants." And I did that, and I didn't need a single one. And that was 2 years ago, and I have had intercourse, I am happy to say, frequently since then, during this whole period, and I've never needed any lubricants. So I just want to, say to anybody is dealing with this issue, ask your doctor if plants are right for you.
Yeah.
Results are typical. So,
Or try it and don't ask your doctor.
well, I'm
What
just
have you
sort of
got to lose but have better sex?
exactly.
Well, and people need to realize that if you have heart disease, I mean, if you have even beginning stages of arteriosclerosis, then you have, as a male, you already are having ED because it's the same disease.
Right, and many mainstream doctors, as they told one of the ex who had the heart attack, 20 years before he had his heart attack, when his ED was first diagnosed, they said this is a leading indicator of heart disease. Yet until he had his heart disease, even though his heart attack, up until that point, he was on blood thinners, he was on high blood pressure medicine, and he was on Lipitor. He would not admit that he had heart disease. He didn't believe he had it. So we have so much re-educating to do in this country, and to the extent that enough doctors really jump on this bandwagon and drill it home to their patients, we have a long way to go.
We have a lot of education to do, and not all blood pressure, some because they're kidney related for someone who maybe lost a kidney or something, but mostly you could say if you have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, if you're on Lipitor, if you're on any of these drugs, guess what? You have heart disease, and it doesn't matter what stage it's in now, it's going to advance, and that is also associated for male with ED. So people just need to become aware of this and quit buying the Viagra and fix the problem at the root source. So go vegan and get better sex, right, Ellen?
You got it.
All right, well, let's stop on that note, but can you leave the listeners with 3 tips maybe to start their vegan journey in an affordable way?
So cook from scratch, shop, buy in bulk. So, usually the price per serving is better that way. Of course, I would love for people to buy all my cookbooks, but there are fabulous resources for free online and recipes that are low-fat, plant-based, and stick to the information in terms of sources from people who have been singing from the songbook a very long time, the doctors, the dietitians. I use running as my activism, but I'm going to be 65 soon. And people are always doing the double take when they hear how old I am, just not, how is that possible? Because I often get pegged at 10 to 20 years younger than I actually am.
Yeah, you look great. That's really the nice side effect of a healthy, whole food, plant-based diet. It's a beauty prescription. It really
Truly.
is.
And it's so ridiculously cheap. We didn't even get into, and I do this in my talks, how much you save by avoiding doctors and disease. And like I said, that heart attack visit, 30 days in the hospital, $1 million. That's not sustainable. We really have got to think about how much, the hamburger that costs $5 at the restaurant, if you dollar cost average that hamburger over the course of all the hamburgers you eat in your lifetime, that's more like $1,000 or a $10,000 hamburger.
Yeah, and even with insurance now, with out-of-pockets at $7,000,
right?
I mean, it's a bank breaker when you get sick. You can't even afford to go to your doctor for a few visits in a year if that's all you need, because you're going to pay the first $7,000. So your real insurance really is your grocery bill and the food you're putting in your body. So that's what people just have to take away and realize that you might spend a little bit more now than eating $1.99 burger or a sad diet, but in the end, it's way cheaper than getting sick. That's for sure.
Yeah. Another just closing line: pay the doctor or pay the farmer.
Oh, that's good. I love that one. All right, so tell people how they can follow you, your website, your Twitter.
Vegcoach.com is my website. You can connect to all my social media and everything else. Email me that way, vegcoach.com, or Ellen Jaffe Jones on Facebook. I have an Eat Vegan on $4 a day Facebook page where I do lunch dates live every Wednesday at 3 Eastern time. I usually cook up recipes from my books or somebody else's, and we have a lot of interaction. Thousands of people just recently switched from doing it from my Ellen Jaffe Jones page to the Eat Vegan page, and we just have a lot more engagement that way. I don't know why, but that works. And
wow, I didn't know that. That's great. I'm going to check that out.
Cool. And then, Twitter, Ellen Jaffe Jones, Instagram, Pinterest, the usual places.
All right, Ellen. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today and sharing your work. And hopefully we get the word out there. But I appreciate you taking the time to do this today. It's been a lot of fun, and thank you.
Oh, Deborah, thank you so much for having me on. My pleasure.
Well, you guys, all I can say is if you're on a budget and you really want to eat a healthy vegan diet, then buy Ellen's book. It's called Eating Vegan on $4 a Day. I think her other book would be very needed out there in the world too, which is called Kitchen Divided, because there's so many cases where one partner becomes a vegan and the other one won't switch. And even if they do eventually, there's often many months or years where the kitchen is divided. And many that I know live in this situation, and sometimes it's permanent and it can be really difficult to handle. And you just want to be able, if you're the vegan person, to stay on your journey and not give up just because you're fighting over the meals in the kitchen. This situation is a big one in relationships. When one is vegan and the other is not, it can actually end a relationship if you don't handle it correctly. So if you're living in this situation, you may want to check out Ellen's other book called Kitchen Divided. So it's true that if people would replace meat and dairy with beans and grains, they would save a lot of money already. And then they could use that savings to buy produce. It's a great tip to join a CSA. I did it for a while. I loved it, but we have a great farmers market here, so I really don't need to do that. But just go online and see if there's one near you. It's really so nice because they give you a big box of local produce and you get to support local farmers and you get to eat seasonally because what's in your box is what's growing at the time. It's a very good way to get a lot of food for not that much money. So check it out and see if you have one near you. I also think one of the biggest takeaways from this interview was when Ellen said that if you're one of the youngest members in your family and you've watched your parents and older siblings suffer with lifestyle diseases such as diabetes, high blood pressure, arterial sclerosis, or other chronic diseases, even cancer, then you better wake up because you know what? You're next. It's only a matter of time, so use their poor health to motivate you to change. Also, it's often so difficult to watch other family members or friends struggle with disease and not change their diet. This is a very sensitive subject and it can be really difficult, but ultimately we have to let go and we have to allow every person to choose what they want for their own life, even if it kills them, sadly. And you know, we can't force anybody to do what we feel is best, so letting go is a must, no matter how hard it is. I know this is a touchy situation, but it's also a very common issue for many people. Mainly, we just have to stay focused on being responsible for our own health and making the right decisions for ourselves and our children, and allow others to choose their choices. I always believe living by example is the best. Lastly, you could hear Ellen's story of her sexual journey of not having sex for over 30 years and then how she managed to have a fulfilled sexual life with a vegan partner and how that was so much easier and so much better than ever before. That was amazing. So be sure to check out her new book, Vegan Sex. So you see, eating plant-based can help with many issues women face like hormone imbalances, dryness, PMS, but it can also help with man issues because so many men need Viagra these days and they're starting to use it in their 20s, which is a sign of early heart disease already. That's scary. And if that's not a reason to go vegan, guys, I don't know what is. Lose your heart disease or your chronic diseases and pains, get your own natural erections and look years younger and improve your sex life. Now, who wouldn't want that? Well, you know what? That's a great note to end on. I'm going to sign off for today, my friends. You know what time it is now. Yep, it's time to say goodbye, but I really hope you enjoyed the show today. Till next week, eat lots of plants, stay well, and cook a few lovely vegan meals this week. Ta-ta for now, my Vidal speakers. Vidal has spoken. Remember, you heal with a plant-powered diet, homeopathy, and detoxing, of course. Peace, be healthy, be free, live life.